This episode is sponsored by my new online course, Mineral Management Basics. Understand what you own, gain the power to manage your minerals and royalties. Did you first find out that you inherited mineral rights or royalties from a phone call or a letter from a landman or mineral buyer? Do you want to have a better handle on what it is that you own so you aren't caught off guard next time? If you're like most people, you want to learn all you can about being a responsible and informed mineral owner. I'm going to help you cut through all the confusion to not only learn more about your existing mineral rights and royalties, but to also equip you with the tools to find out if you might own other interests that you don't currently know about. In Mineral Management Basics, I'll walk you step by step through the process of finding out exactly what you own and where it is located, with high-quality videos that aren't too long and examples along the way. You'll be able to locate your mineral and royalty interests on a map, perform your own title search, and identify nearby oil and gas activity. Your interests are depending on you to find them. Go to mineralrightspodcast.com and click on courses to learn more and sign up today. Again, that's mineralrightspodcast.com and click on the courses link to learn more.
Are you ready to make the most of your oil and gas mineral rights? Welcome to the Mineral Rights Podcast. Get the knowledge and resources you need to manage your minerals and royalties. Here is your host, Matt Sands.
Hello and welcome to the Mineral Rights Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Sands, and I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Williams. And we're here to help you make the most of your minerals and royalties. And Justin, today we're going to talk about how to avoid scams and frauds with minerals and royalties. And before we dive into this, we were having a conversation before we hit record, and there's seemingly no shortage of ways people are trying to take advantage of unsuspecting mineral and royalty owners out there.
You nailed it, Matt. This is one of the areas where it doesn't have a lot of sophistication yet on protections for owners. And though we'll talk about some that are starting to come up in some ways, but it'll be interesting to see how this develops to protect the owners from what can seem like unsuspecting scams.
Yeah, I would say they're not super common, but when we say common scams, they're things that we see in different states across the country. They happen repeatedly. They're out there to try to take advantage of the lack of knowledge that a lot of mineral and royalty owners have. And so I would say a lot of these quote unquote scams are around the more information on the side of the scammer, and then, sort of the unsuspecting mineral or royalty owner on the other hand. And we'll talk about three main types of scams that have been sort of popularized over the past several years, and then ways that you can avoid them. And then as well as some potential recourse if you happen to get caught up in one of these between you or a family member, and what you should do to try to get things remedied. Of course, before we get into this is diving into an area where we're eventually going to need help from an attorney if you're in one of these situations. So this shouldn't be construed as legal or tax advice. Be sure to get help from a competent attorney licensed in the state where your minerals and or royalties are located to get help if you find yourself in one of these situations. But fortunately, Justin, a lot of these common scams can be avoided very quickly by just identifying red flags and warning signs. And so that's what we're going to do today to help highlight some of that. So do you want to dive into this first potential scam?
Let's do it, Matt. And we touched on this a little bit in one of our listener Q&As. So there is the finder's fee, unclaimed royalties. They'll go and find it for you. And this is something that it seems to be popping up more and more, Matt. It's individuals that contact you claiming to help you recoup unclaimed royalties on property that you didn't know you owned. And in these circumstances, the royalty owner usually has a lot of money being held in suspense with an oil and gas operator. And Matt, to kind of set the stage here, when we say funds in suspense, and we're meaning that there's production, past production, that for whatever reason, the oil and gas company is holding those funds for the owner, whether it be for title work or finding the proper person. In these situations where royalty owners are the heir to royalty interests that didn't go through probate to properly distribute those assets, that can be a reason. And then sometimes if it goes long enough, those funds can also be cheated to the state. And I think, Matt, most often when we hear of this was kind of the catalyst. It was cheated to the state that is a public record that other people can look at.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that's how these people find you and find these very valuable interests is It's public record that your relative has a certain amount of royalties that are being held by the state, the amounts are typically there. In some states, some they're not. They just say maybe more than $500, but oftentimes the perpetrator of this type of call it a scam will look and see multiple royalty checks that say maybe more than $500, more than $500, and they can say, okay, this is a lot of money potentially that's out here, that if we are able to get a percentage of that, it's going to be a significant windfall. And so it's through the unclaimed funds and unclaimed property process within the state that stuff is out there. Again, that escheatment, what that means is basically once the oil and gas company keeps trying to pay your relative royalties, the checks don't get cashed, and maybe the royalty checks get returned back to the operator as undeliverable. They've made an attempt to try to pay the royalty owner. They couldn't pay them, and so they can't just keep that money. And so what they do is they hold it in suspense for a period of time, and then after a while, it is just a burden on their balance sheet. So there's a process in each state for them to hand that over to the state as the administrator of these unclaimed funds going forward. And so typically it's through the state comptroller or some office like that that they administer this. And most every state has a website where you can go and search for your name or for your relative's name to see if you have any funds that might be out there. So if you have a relative that recently passed away and you're one of the heirs, it's certainly a good idea. And it's periodically a good idea to do that in your own name, because I know we've talked to a couple of people on the show and they've said, yeah, I searched my name and sure enough, there was something that popped up in the past couple of years. And so even though there'd been no like life event that had triggered this, it just was something where the company wasn't able to pay them, or maybe the check got lost and it didn't get deposited. And so that just got turned over to the state. And so it's a good idea to periodically search and see if you have anything out there. So that's the first thing. So that's one way that they identify this. The other way is in states like Texas, the tax roll actually will list how much you're getting paid. Your tax bill is a percentage of your royalties that you're paid. And so if people have, for example, outstanding taxes, they might say, "Oh, this person, there's something out there. This person is missing. Probably there's some escheated funds," and they probably go search the state website and see that there are some royalties out there. So the combination of the state tax roll or the county tax rolls in certain states, the escheated funds or unclaimed property websites can kind of paint a picture for these people to go and identify who these potential heirs are to these interests. And so they can contact them and say, hey, by the way, you have these mineral interests or royalty interests that you maybe didn't know about. We'll help you recoup those unclaimed funds or the funds held in suspense in exchange for a finder's fee. And by certain state law, like Texas, I think, Justin, you looked this up and I think you said it was 10%. Is that right?
Yep, that's correct. And Texas is 10%. And, Matt, it's not really illegal per se to charge a finder's fee, but we had one of our listeners, Mike, that brought something to our attention. And was this company was looking for a 20% finder's fee and also to keep a percentage of the minerals in exchange. And the way they were justifying that was by doing title work for them, helping them to get the title to a curative place where they can get paid. And Matt, that's a really interesting take on that. But still, who knows if the way that Texas would see that.
Yeah, I think they're probably looking at that as kind of a loophole. They're going above and beyond just connecting the person with the state and getting those unclaimed funds paid out and then taking a percentage of that, doing the administrative paperwork and helping them process that. It's going into the detail of maybe running title, going through probate, and then paying the legal fees associated with that and getting the all title curative taken care of so that the minerals can be titled over to the person that they're helping. But then in exchange for that service, which in and of itself is a valuable service, but the amount that they're effectively charging for that is probably 10 times what it would actually cost for somebody to go and do this on their own. So, for example, our listener, Mike, that had to do this for him, or actually for his wife, the agreement said that they were going to get 20% of the mineral interest as well as 20% of the royalties in suspense. Well, Mike's wife has, 20 plus net acres in Howard County, Texas, and kind of the heart of the Midland Basin, which, depending on if there's wells permitted, it could be tens of thousands of dollars per acre in value. So conservatively, if we say, just as in a hypothetical example, we're worth like $250,000, this 20% of the money that is held in suspense, not to mention the value of those mineral interests at $250,000 total, they're getting, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in exchange for getting this all cleared up. Whereas Mike could hire an attorney to open probate and get the minerals in their name for $5,000 roughly. Could be more, could be less, just depends on the situation. But just rough order of magnitude, when we look at that compared to the $50,000 to $100,000 that the 20% represents, it's pretty clear that this is taking advantage of the unsuspecting mineral or royalty owner that maybe would sign this. And, whereas they could hire an attorney and get help to take care of this, $400 an hour is a lot for an attorney, but it's pretty cheap when you think about the relative cost versus the value of these types of interests. So this is how they prey on unsuspecting mineral and royalty owners, by looking for very valuable properties with funds in suspense or funds being held by the state that they can help the royalty owner claim on behalf for a finder's fee, which in this particular example, 20% is a significant portion of that. And to be deeding over 20% of the future interest as well, it seems like a lot. So it's one thing if they were taking 20% of the royalties being held in suspense and, kind of what that known quantity is, but they're getting more than that. So that's kind of a situation where somebody that, granted, could be actually helping them get the funds paid, getting the property titled over to them. But when you think about, again, the relative cost of that versus doing it on your own, it's probably going to cost you like maybe 1% to 3% of the value of those unclaimed funds and the minerals themselves, like in this example here. Whereas if you're getting charged 20% for that, that's, a good 10x what it would really cost for you to go and do this yourself. So not necessarily illegal, not necessarily something that person would go to jail, but it's, I think, taking advantage of the lack of knowledge by the unsuspecting mineral and royalty owner.
You nailed it, Matt. And even in a use case where maybe the person was offering a fair deal for the services that they were going to provide, it doesn't alleviate the mineral owner from needing to have an attorney review all of the documents that you're signing for this company. Because it could very easily play out that 20% of royalties that you thought, or 20% of the mineral interest that you thought you were giving, if that language is written deceptively, you could really get into a much worse situation or give more than you originally anticipated.
Yeah, that's a great point. So next one, Justin, you want to talk about our next common scam here?
Let's do it. So this is the royalty lease scam, and I was saying before the show, this is one I actually haven't heard of. So it was interesting to kind of take this on. And the most common scenario that many of you have dealt with is leasing your mineral rights so that a company can drill a well. That contract outlines the terms, which is a mineral lease, also called an oil and gas lease. And that mineral lease is a standard lease agreement between two parties that gives the lessee the right to explore and produce certain minerals with a specific parcel or tract of land in exchange for a predetermined compensation. Very common. We talk about these a lot. Most leases nowadays are called paid up oil and gas leases. In a paid up lease, an upfront lease bonus is paid so that the lease will be in effect for an entire primary term with no requirement for future payments to the lessor unless production is established. And at that point, the royalty rate kicks in. So the royalty lease scam is where you're contacted with a royalty lease offer for a property that's already under an existing lease, making it look and sound like a mineral top lease, Matt, which we've talked about this here recently. A top lease is an oil and gas lease that's signed before the termination of an existing lease and only becomes effective if and when the existing lease expires. Bonus payments paid at the signing of that top lease. In areas that are extremely competitive, companies will top lease to secure a possible land position if the existing lessee doesn't drill a well. And in other words, the lease is taken on top of that pre-existing lease. And Matt, the scam kind of plays off of that concept. And for somebody who doesn't know more, could be easy to take it as that.
Yeah, that's a great point. And like Justin mentioned, we covered that in pretty extensive detail in episode 210. So if you're faced with the situation of top leasing, then that's a great one to listen to. But, just in general, like you said, Justin, I think that top leasing in and of itself can be kind of a tricky situation because there's definitely pros and cons that are involved with it. And certainly it's something where, to your earlier point, you'd want to get help from an attorney just to make sure that you're understanding exactly what you're signing, what you're getting, because oftentimes top leases are being presented to secure a position if your existing oil and gas lease were to expire. And so you want to make sure that you're getting top dollar, in kind of the same terms you would get in a competitive leasing situation should that lease expire and you're going out to the open market. So that's one potential pitfalls with top leasing, is that if you just signed the first top lease you get, then you could be not getting as good of terms as you could have otherwise gotten if you'd negotiated. But in this particular situation, what they're trying to do is they pass it off as what appears to be a top lease. You kind of look at face value. Okay, this looks like a lease. They format it like a lease. Everything's set up like an oil and gas lease, but really what it is a term deed. And so what you are signing is a term royalty deed, which basically conveys your royalty interest, in this case, the buyer of that term royalty. And in and of itself, a term deed is not bad necessarily if it's presented as such. So if you have somebody that approaches you to sign a term deed, it's just basically something you need to understand what you're signing, right? You need to understand that you're selling your interest or a portion of your interest for a period of time. And so you should receive adequate compensation for that. And the reason this becomes a scam is because by presenting this as an oil and gas lease, the company can pay a much smaller fraction in what they're calling the lease bonus, which is really the compensation or the consideration for the sale of your royalties for a period of time. And so when you think about what you're giving up usually the majority of your future royalties in that tract, and you're getting a very small percentage of the value associated with that in most cases, because they're approaching people that in a really good area, really high amount of royalties that are being paid, and then paying them pennies on the dollar to acquire that. And the reason this was able to pass by many unsuspecting royalty owners is because, again, they sort of make it look like an oil and gas lease. They think they're signing a top lease. So the compensation, let's say, even if they got $3,000 an acre, that's not bad. Well, little did they know that they're getting just, again, a fraction of the compensation, and they were actually signing away a good portion of their interest. Now, thankfully, Texas has done something to address this. They passed legislation in 2019 where they actually require that the following language shows up in 14-point font on all pages above a oil and gas royalty lease and above the signature block. And any royalty lease has to say, this is not an oil and gas lease. You are selling all or a portion of your mineral or royalty interest in, and then whatever the description of that property being conveyed is. And so that has to be conspicuous and has to be transparent to the person that's signing that, so that they know that they're actually signing away a portion of that. And the reason that this is so nefarious, here's a specific example to sort of illustrate the point. So, Justin, let's say that you've leased your minerals under a paid up oil and gas lease in exchange for a bonus payment and a 25% royalty. You're in an area that is hot. You have a lot of leasing and drilling activity. You're still under that lease, but you get an oil and gas royalty lease offer in the mail. Again, it looks like a top lease. You're like, great, I can cash in on that. And then if this existing lease expires, then I'm covered, and hopefully they'll drill a well. And they might approach you and say, we're acquiring leases in your area on behalf of whatever company and would like to extend a lease offer. We offer to lease your royalty interest under the following terms. So anytime you see they're going to lease your royalty interest, that should raise a big red flag. What a mineral lease will say, or an oil and gas lease will say, well, we'll offer to lease your mineral rights under the following terms. And they'll say, we'll pay you this lease bonus along with a 1/4 royalty to lease your interest. And again, if you don't read the fine print, you wouldn't realize you're effectively exchanging a month or two of the potential future royalty payments up front. So that what they're calling the lease bonus payment, you're getting a couple of months of compensation of those future royalties in exchange for signing over, if they, for example, in this case, 75% of your future royalty stream until the end of the lease. So that's where the term comes in. So it's for a finite term. It's not perpetual. It's while the oil and gas lease is in effect, you're basically selling the portion of your royalties from that lease. And then when that oil and gas lease expires, then that term deed would expire. And so you would get 100% after that point. But unfortunately, you would have given up a lot of money in the meantime. And again, just to illustrate how this would work is if you owned 100% of the minerals under a drilling unit, instead of receiving the 1/4 royalty that you expect from your original oil and gas lease, you would be getting 1/4 of 1/4 or 1/16 of the royalty. So instead of 25%, you would get 6.25%. Again, this is because you sold the other 75% through that term royalty deed, which was disguised as an oil and gas lease. So again, that's where this is so nefarious, is that it takes advantage of people that don't read the language of what they're signing. So this is why we say always contact an attorney to review any instrument or any document or contract before you sign it. And I know that this is blanket advice, and sometimes it may not make financial sense if you're getting $25 a year in royalties, and the interest may not be worth a lot. But in these types of situations where you're getting these types of offers, it's where these interests are very valuable. You're going to get tens of thousands of dollars or thousands of dollars a month. So spending a few $100s to have an attorney review something is money well spent, as compared to taking the risk of signing something that's going to give away thousands of dollars unsuspectingly. So
Absolutely, Matt. I think many attorneys too, many attorneys offer free consults, and this is the kind of thing in the oil and gas world that attorneys would be happy to look at and at least can point you in the right direction or tell you what you should do. And again, Matt, it's just very deceptive. Instruments have a purpose, and this type of instrument was created for a purpose, and folks just take advantage of it and take advantage of people who don't understand what they're reading. And the attorney will certainly help to serve them.
that's exactly right. And then thankfully in Texas, again, if that language that we mentioned before is not included on the document that very conspicuously says that you're selling all or a portion of your mineral royalty interest, then thankfully that instrument would be void. So even if they did try to pass that off as a top lease and get you to sign it, when it gets recorded, it would be void. Now you'd still have to hire an attorney to probably get it resolved, but thankfully that law that they passed would pretty much make that null and void, at the moment that it was signed and recorded. So, certainly something to be aware of, but thankfully some states are starting to take action. I'm not sure in other states if they've addressed it yet, Justin, but hopefully that's something that people are aware of, and that will either through listening to this kind of make sure that you arm yourself with the knowledge to very carefully review these types of documents, as well as hopefully additional legislation getting passed to protect mineral and royalty owners. So do you want to talk about the next one here?
Let's do it, man. And so a fraudulent deed, this is an area where this could be a really severe impact, and it's easy to kind of stumble across this. And if you were to sign something that you just didn't know what you were signing, it would be very easy to fall into this area. And so if you've got a deed that's being filed that conveys your mineral rights to somebody else, the scam that happens is people will fraudulently sign names. Matt, there was a story not too long ago about this happening. It's happened in other states. And this is some cases where it's done by somebody who was already in the talks of buying the interest from a mineral owner. And then that buyer can forge the seller's signature to get money that's been held in suspense. And Matt, this could be hundreds of thousands of dollars. In other cases, it was done completely without the knowledge of the mineral owner. And they have to forge your signature in this case. And if you don't do anything about it, then you can end up losing your property. This is something where oil and gas companies are processing changes of ownership constantly, and this may not throw a red flag to the oil and gas company.
Yeah, that's a good point. They don't know if compensation or consideration wasn't provided in exchange for those interests. So by definition, they're assuming that, that was done. It's spelled out in the deed. And then if that's what they assume is your signature on it, then they'll assume that it was a valid transaction. And so they'll honor it. And so that's where it gets really complicated, is if somebody does this, they steal your minerals or royalties, a well gets drilled, royalties get paid to the quote unquote buyer who stole these royalties, then all of a sudden you have lots of money that you're having to go after the operator to then get this cleared up. You have to hire an attorney to address the fraudulent deed and get that hopefully nullified and get things back in your name. But then it's, a huge headache. It's going to cost you money to do it. Hopefully you can find the person that did it. The one, I guess, silver lining to this is the idiots that perpetrate this scam are putting their name on public record. and their, address is out there. Now, granted, it'll probably be a PO box and they'll probably have a shell company, but hopefully with some investigation, you could get to the bottom of who was really the person behind it, and the attorney general could prosecute it and convict them, and then hopefully they would be liable for any of the attorney's fees or getting things back and paid out to you. But it's going to be a huge headache. It's something you can't really prevent, at least right now. We're hoping that technology will facilitate having one version of the truth of who owns what, and it would be something where you'd have to approve of a transaction like that. Lots to come there, but for now, we're relying on paper documents and signatures and the assumption that the document is valid, and so you have to stay on top of things. And so I think this is a situation, Justin, where there are some services out there or some counties that have notification where you can sign up, and anything that is recorded in that county under your name, or you can maybe potentially a particular legal description, you would get notified. So you're made aware as soon as it happens so you could take action. Or, I wonder if something like LifeLock or something like that might be another option that you could look at, services that you pay for, like identity theft kind of services. But this would be a tricky one, Justin, if you get caught up in this.
It sure would be. And it really takes advantage of folks who don't know what they have. Matt, if you're a mineral owner that's on top of any new production in your areas that you own and you have an inventory of what you own, this would be much more difficult. But for those that they don't understand it, they don't know what's out there, this could really be a dangerous and time-consuming one to remedy, unfortunately. And Matt, you kind of touched on technology. There's tools and resources that you can use to protect yourself. And I think the biggest one, Matt, is education. Knowing about mineral rights and knowing how to avoid these is really the number one. And membership in organizations like NARO, the National Association of Royalty Owner, and then other places where you can learn information to manage your royalties is just really important. And like we've talked about the whole show, having an attorney to work with is also brutally important. It's really worth taking the time to build that relationship with somebody that can help you review these documents.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I have an online course that's coming up here in October of 2023 when we're recording this later this month. It's going to go live. I'm really excited to get it out there. And basically, the goal of this course is to help you understand what you own, proactively manage your minerals and royalties so that you can avoid these types of situations, and also to get in front of when there might be activity in your area, identify when permits are filed, when you should perhaps look at maybe proactively signing a lease or getting multiple lease offers. And so that's the whole point, is to understand what you own, be able to research that on your own, and then look at the state oil and gas information to see what the oil and gas potential of your property is. And so that's what this all boils down to. Like Justin said, it's getting help from trusted advisors that you can contact when you have questions, and then arming yourself with knowledge. Listening to this show is a great start. The course that I'm coming out with will be another option if you want to go a little bit deeper. And then also organizations like NARO. I can't stress enough how important networking, talking to other mineral and royalty owners, learning from others. We have educational events that you can attend in person or virtually to learn about topics like this, or topics that can help you stay on top of things, to be proactive in managing your minerals and royalties. Because I know it can be a full-time job if you let it, and you need the shortcut, the answer to the back of the book. We have these great resources out there, whether again, it's membership through NARO, which is very reasonably priced, my online course, listening to this show. It's just arming yourself with the knowledge to enable you to proactively manage your minerals and royalties, and also to know about these types of issues so that you can prevent yourself from getting caught up in a scam. Like Justin, when you get contacted with a phishing scam, they're getting more and more sophisticated with AI and things like that. You got to be more and more aware and hyper vigilant, not just with minerals and royalties, but anything with any sort of financial aspect to it.
You nailed it. And, if it smells bad, if it smells fishy, if it, for whatever reason, gives you the heebie-jeebies, if you're being rushed, use your intuition and don't just sign something quickly to return it. And, I think with minerals, especially larger interest, they can be dangling that carrot in front of you of a large check. And anytime they're doing that, it's worth thinking, why is it worth it to them to be able to pay me this money? Because at the end of the day, this is a business.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So if you don't know why you're getting offered that amount of money, that should be a trigger to go and find out more, at least to know why they're contacting you. Usually there's a big reason, right? They're drilling new wells. There's a lot of money that's going to be coming your way. And so you want to understand what you're giving up, get a valuation, get an appraisal, understand what your property's worth before you sign a agreement to sell your interest or to lease. Get some help. And that can go a long way in protecting you. And then just to kind of close this out with a little anecdotal example, I almost fell victim to a phishing scam here recently. I was contacted by somebody that claimed they were from my bank saying, hey, we've had a couple of charges that were questionable. They showed up in this city and state. And, did you make this charge or this purchase? And it was like Walmart, for like $500 or something. I'm like, no, that's definitely not me. And then they said, oh, this other one, that was a pre-approval of this other purchase at some other store. And I said, no, that's definitely not me. And they said, okay, let me do a little bit of research. We'll get this straightened away for you. So we're going to contact you with a 6-digit security code to verify your identity. And that was a huge red flag to me because, first of all, you should always have 2-factor authentication set up on your financial accounts. So what that is where if you log in with a username and password, you have either a 2-factor authentication, like a random key that's generated every 30 seconds or so that you have to enter in. That'd be the first preference. Or sometimes they will send you like a 6 or 8-digit code via text message or via email to confirm that it's you that's actually logging into your account. And I highly recommend everybody enable that on any account that you have, whether it's a credit card account, a bank account, brokerage account, even, anything related to your minerals and royalties, whether that's Energy Link or any of those types of things. If you can enable 2-factor authentication, definitely do it. But the reason that I knew that this was a red flag in this case is because they were asking for me to tell them what my 2-factor authentication code was. And they claimed to verify my identity. And I said, no, I'm not going to give you that because I don't know that you're with my bank. You could be a scammer. And, after I said that, they hung up. So I knew sure enough, that was a scam call. But I almost got caught thinking, oh, wow, somebody has made a fraudulent purchase. And I was driving in the car when this person called. And so that's kind of why I was going down that path. Well, thankfully, I said, no, I need to stop. I'm driving right now. I'll stop and look at my account. I want to verify these charges on my account to confirm what you're talking about. And as soon as I stopped, 5 or 10 minutes later, first thing I did was change the password to my bank account. And then I looked and there were no fraudulent charges. Those charges that they were claiming that were made on my card or on my account were not showing up anywhere. So that was another confirmation that it was just a phishing scam. But these people are getting more and more sophisticated, with AI, I think deep fakes and things like that, where somebody will call claiming to be your relative. It'll sound like them. They'll say, hey, I need you to send me money. I'm in jail or I'm somewhere and I don't have any money. Those are the types of things where your spidey senses should go off, should raise a huge red flag. You should be able, have a safe word with that person. Hopefully that you can know that whether it's them or not, because in reality, I wouldn't be surprised for these phishing scams to get more and more sophisticated to where it's almost impossible to tell if it's real or fake unless we have some alternate way that's not written down that only you and your loved ones know about. Like a safe word or something. So beware out there, be careful. Hopefully this raises awareness of these potential scams so that you don't get caught up in them. And if you hear of anything or if you've gotten caught up in a scam, definitely reach out, let us know. We'd love to share that information so others can learn from it. But again, we'll link to all the resources mentioned in today's show in the show notes, which as always can be found at mineralrightspodcast.com. So until next time, thanks, Justin.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks so much for listening to the Mineral Rights Podcast with your host, Matt Sands. Don't forget to subscribe and share at mineralrightspodcast.com. The Mineral Rights Podcast should not be construed as investment, legal, or tax advice. All information is believed to be from reliable sources. However, we make no representation as to its completeness or accuracy.